They never looked me in the eye when they spoke to me, if they spoke to me at all. To them, I was just her, the quiet old woman who poured the tea, folded the towels, and made sure their shoes never gathered dust by the door. I wasn't always this invisible, you know. Once I wore red heels and danced under chandeliers, laughed too loud, and signed checks that made men flinch. But over the years, they stripped that version of me away until all that remained was the ghost of their convenience. On my 80th birthday, they forgot my name. So I gave them a reason to remember. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Margaret Eloise Carter, and for the last 15 years, I've lived in the spare room at the end of my son's hallway. Not a guest room, no, those had clean sheets and scented candles for the important visitors. Mine had a broken lamp, a mattress that sagged like old knees, and a rickety dresser with no knobs. My son, Edward, married into pride. His wife, Janice, was the type of woman who wore beige sweaters with diamond pins, called tuna, niçoise, and believed kindness was something you offered when the cameras were rolling. From the day I moved in, after my hip surgery made stairs a gamble, I became their house ghost. Mother-in-law or maid? I once overheard Janice ask her bridge group, the laughter muffled behind clinking wine glasses. They all thought I couldn't hear them, couldn't think, couldn't matter. I wasn't allowed in the kitchen when Janice was hosting. She said I slowed the flow. I wasn't trusted with the grandkids alone, not after I let little Ellie stay up past 9 that one magical night when we built pillow forts and pretended the carpet was lava. The next morning, Ellie told her mother she wished I was her real mom. They didn't speak to me for a week. The house was big, too big, with walls that echoed with expensive silence. I filled the gaps with my humming old show tunes and lullabies no one remembered anymore. I cleaned because it kept me moving. I folded towels because they never folded them right. I organized their medicine cabinets, sorted their laundry, and made notes when I saw anything suspicious on their bank statements, not that they'd listen. But I watched and remembered, especially the day Janice made me serve hors d'oeuvres at her book club. I wore black slacks and a white blouse, like I used to at the Violet Room, the fine dining jazz club I owned back in my 30s. You carry that tray like it's your only skill, she snorted as I passed her a shrimp puff. That night, in the solitude of my spare room, I stared at the one photo I'd brought with me, a faded print of me in a red sequin dress, toasting champagne with a table full of men in tuxedos. That was the grand opening night. The night before everything changed. The night before love ruined me. They didn't know who I was. They didn't want to know. But they would. And soon. Stories. Betrayal. Suspense. I used to be the kind of woman people wrote about. Now I was the woman people dismissed before I could finish a sentence. One morning, while scrubbing a mysterious red stain from the bottom of Janice's favorite Le Creuset pan, berry compote, she said, though it smelled like guilt, I overheard Edward and Janice talking about my room. "She's been here too long," Janice whispered. "It's not right for Ellie to see her like this. We need that room for a live-in tutor. A live-in tutor. For a 7-year-old. Mom's got nowhere else," Edward mumbled. "Not after she sold the house." Sold the house? That's what he believed. What they all believed. I sat in the same chair every night beside the dusty bay window. On my lap sat an old leather-bound ledger, the kind used before spreadsheets took over the world. Inside, in careful cursive, I had kept a secret, every investment, every sale, every loan repaid in full with interest. I documented every dollar I quietly moved after my cafe closed, every small inheritance I folded into real estate. No one asked, so I never offered. Because why would an old woman need money? Because maids don't carry portfolios. And mothers are supposed to give everything away. Maybe we should look into assisted living, Janice added casually. A nice one. Far. Somewhere with nurses. My stomach turned. I kept my face blank, cleaned the pan, and returned to my room. That night, I took the ledger from beneath my bed and ran my fingers over the embossed initials M.E.C. Margaret Eloise Carter. That name used to mean something in this town. It would again. I made a list. Banks, lawyers, deeds, favors owed. I'd started gathering them years ago just in case. People assumed I'd wasted my retirement on crossword puzzles and cat food. What they didn't know was that the old woman in the spare room held the mortgage to this very house. Yes, their house. Technically, the title was under a trust one created during the final year of my cafe when I saw the storm coming. My son's startup was bleeding cash, and Janice was too proud to work. I offered to help by buying their house in secret, told them I had an old friend who'd do it discreetly, for tax reasons. They signed the papers without reading. Now, as I looked at the list, I realized the final piece was falling into place. My 80th birthday was just 3 days away. They hadn't mentioned it, not once. I decided I'd give them a gift instead. A party they'd never forget. Because when someone decides you're invisible, they never see the twist coming. On the morning of my birthday, Janice reminded me to wash the guest towels. Just because we're not celebrating doesn't mean the house can look like a mess, she said, sipping her lemon water while scrolling through her phone. And do trim those roses, they're making the front porch look overgrown. No happy birthday. No card. Not even a candle. It was perfect. I trimmed the roses, humming softly, the shears clipping to the rhythm of a plan 15 years in the making. The sky was cloudy, just the way I liked it. Clouds had a way of making people honest. On bright days, they pretended to be better than they were. On cloudy days, truth hung in the air like humidity. I finished my morning tasks with robotic obedience, smiled when spoken to, and waited until they left for the day. Then I made the calls. First to my lawyer, an old jazz pianist I used to date back in the Violet Room days. Leonard Hart. Sharp as ever, still kept his loyalty where it counted. He confirmed everything was ready: the trust, the asset transfers, the pre-approved press release. All triggered on my verbal command. Next was the florist. I requested 100 crimson roses, delivered by hand, each one bearing a name tag: Janice, Edward, Ellie, and a few others. They'd know what it meant. Red had always been my color, bold, passionate, impossible to ignore. And finally, the invitations. They weren't traditional, not by any means. I sent them out digitally, one email, carefully crafted, sent to 40 names I knew Janice would kill to impress. Neighbors, club members, society patrons, former board members from the town's historical committee. The subject line read, "You're cordially invited to Margaret E. Carter's 80th birthday gala, hosted at the Carter residence." I attached a photo of me in that red sequin dress, young, smiling, and very much not invisible. Time: 6 p.m. Dress code, formal theme, legacy reclaimed, catering, the Violet Room revival. Yes, I brought the chef out of retirement. I watched the RSVP confirmations roll in like clockwork. At 5 p.m., the florists arrived. At 5:30, the catering vans pulled up. At 5:45, the valet service stationed their boys on the driveway, ready for a night to remember. Janice and Edward came home at 6:10 p.m. "What the hell is this?" Janice shrieked as she stepped over a red carpet that hadn't been there that morning. "I thought we weren't doing anything tonight," Edward yelled, his eyes scanning the crowd of well-dressed guests already mingling in his living room. "Surprise," I said from the top of the stairs, wearing a new red gown, lips painted like fire, earrings catching the chandelier's light. "But why are they here?" Janice's voice cracked. "Oh, it's simple," I smiled, descending each step like a queen returning to her throne. "They're here because this is my house. And today, I'm taking it back." The room quieted. The pianist began playing an old jazz tune I used to sing to. They didn't know yet, but they would. By the end of the night, everyone would know. The living room buzzed with disbelief, polite confusion masked beneath champagne flutes and diamond brooches. Faces I hadn't seen in years nodded toward me with cautious recognition, some genuine, others feigning familiarity. But every eye was drawn to me. Finally drawn to me. I stood beneath the crystal chandelier Janice claimed was too extravagant for someone of my generation. Funny, it shimmered brighter tonight than I'd ever seen it, almost as if it, too, had been waiting for this moment. Janice and Edward stood in a corner like children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. "Margaret," Edward hissed, tugging my elbow. "What are you doing?" "Celebrating, darling," I said sweetly. "My house. My birthday. My rules." "You invited the entire board of the Historical Society?" Janice's voice was trembling now. "They haven't returned my calls in months." "Oh, I know," I replied, sipping champagne. "That's why I made sure they'd return mine." Just then, Leonard took the stage near the piano, microphone in hand. He still had that baritone charm that made women swoon in the 60s. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, a quick word of appreciation. "Tonight we celebrate not just a milestone birthday, but a woman whose legacy has quietly shaped the very fabric of this town." Janice stiffened. Edward blinked. Leonard continued. "Margaret Eloise Carter, entrepreneur, artist, philanthropist, and founder of the Violet Room," gasps. I watched as Janice's mouth parted ever so slightly. She didn't know. None of them knew. Who, despite the spotlight leaving her in recent years, continued to build and invest in this community. Including, he added with a knowing smile, this very property, which she graciously allowed her son's family to reside in all these years. Quiet generosity. The highest kind. The applause was thunderous. "Real." Janice turned red. "You told me we bought this house together," she whispered. "You lied to us?" "No," I said calmly. "You never asked the right questions. And you never listened when I tried to speak." She turned to Edward, eyes frantic. "Is this true? Did she own it this whole time?" Edward looked sick. You said it was a friend helping us through escrow." "She did," I smiled. "Her name just happened to be Margaret E. Carter." Guests surrounded me. Photos were taken. The historical committee chair asked if I'd speak at their upcoming gala. And still Janice stood in the shadows, shaking, watching as the old woman from the spare room lit up the center of the stage. For the grand finale, Leonard handed me the mic. "Thank you all," I said, voice strong, steady. For so long, I was treated like part of the wallpaper. Like an aging ornament nobody wanted but couldn't throw away. I poured tea, folded towels, and endured silence. The crowd hushed. But I've learned something powerful in my years. Silence can be a weapon. And when wielded correctly, it becomes the loudest voice in the room. I turned to Edward and Janice, locked eyes. And tonight, I reclaim that voice. The applause shook the walls. Behind the smiles and claps, I saw their world cracking. And I had only just begun. By the time the pianist started his second set and the waiters served mini lobster rolls, Janice had disappeared. Edward lingered awkwardly near the French doors, pretending to scroll through his phone. I knew he wanted to pull me aside. He didn't. He didn't know how. People kept coming up to me. "You haven't aged a day. You ran the Violet Room? My parents met there. Is it true you own the Carter building downtown?" I answered each question with poise, a smile, and an occasional sip of champagne. But my eyes never stopped watching them, the son and daughter-in-law who once whispered behind my back, who now stood cornered in plain view. When the crowd shifted toward the back patio for dancing, I saw my moment. I walked over to Edward, heels clicking like punctuation. "Let's talk," I said, voice low. He nodded, stiffly. We slipped into the study and shut the door behind us. "What the hell is going on?" he blurted. "Why would you do this in front of everyone?" "I gave you a home when you couldn't afford one," I said, calm. "I let your pride have the upper hand." "But after years of being treated like a burden, you were never a burden," he interrupted, too late. "Don't lie, Edward. It doesn't suit you." I opened my clutch and pulled out a single white envelope. He eyed it like it might explode. "What is it?" "3 things," I said, handing it over. 1. A notarized letter informing you the trust has revoked your residential privileges. Effective immediately. You're kicking us out, he gasped. You can't. I can, I said. I'm the owner. And my lawyers will file formal notice tomorrow morning. His hands shook as he opened the second sheet. 2. I continued, a list of every unkind act Janice inflicted on me. Documented. Recorded. Including witnesses. Should you attempt to contest the trust, this becomes public. The society crowd might forgive a poor son, but not a cruel daughter-in-law. He flipped the page, saw Janice's quotes, she's dead weight. She should be grateful we even let her breathe our air. His face collapsed. And 3, I said, softer now, a check. He looked up. For what? Enough to start again. For Ellie's sake. His eyes filled, not with gratitude, with shame. You really think we deserve that? I paused. No. But Ellie does. Just then, Janice burst in. Her mascara had smudged, and her tone was acid. We are not leaving. This is our house. No, I said, turning to her. It was my house. Now it's my legacy. She laughed, sharp, desperate. And what? You'll live here alone? Throw parties for ghosts? I smiled. No, Janice. I'm turning it into a retreat for women like me. Invisible mothers. Overlooked caretakers. Survivors. Her jaw dropped. I'll fill these rooms with women who know what it's like to be erased, I added. And then remind them how powerful it is to reappear. Janice's voice cracked. You can't do this, but I already had. The party thinned around 10 p.m., with guests leaving behind empty flutes and murmurs of admiration. What a comeback, one whispered as he shook my hand. They'll be talking about this for years. I nodded, graciously. I was already thinking about tomorrow. Edward and Janice sat stiffly at the dinner table. Ellie, quiet and confused, picked at her slice of cake with a silver fork. She didn't understand the storm unraveling around her, but she could sense the tension. Children always can. Ellie, sweetheart, I said, settling beside her. Did you enjoy the cake? She nodded and whispered, It's the best I ever had, Grandma. That nearly undid me. Janice opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. Before you say something you'll regret, let me say this. This will be the last supper you have in this house. Edward rubbed his temple. You're serious. I've never been more. They stared at me, each hoping I would waver. I didn't. You've treated me like the maid. Like I didn't exist. And I accepted it. But Ellie, she sees me. She loves me. And for her, I will not keep shrinking into corners just to keep your egos comfortable. You're ruining our lives, Janice hissed. No. I'm reclaiming mine. I stood and walked to the piano, tapping the top of the keys gently, like an old friend. This house will no longer be a sanctuary for cruelty disguised as order, I continued. It will be a place of healing. Janice stood, breath shallow. And you think the world will see you as a hero? No, I said, smiling softly. They'll see me as someone who finally stood up. She stormed out of the room, heels slamming down the hallway. Edward looked down, ashamed. You could have told me, he murmured. You were too busy not listening, I replied. But it's not too late to start. We sat there, just the two of us, with the soft sounds of jazz in the background and the scent of peonies in the air. He didn't say another word. When Ellie finished her cake, I walked her upstairs, tucked her in, and kissed her forehead. I don't want to leave you, Grandma, she whispered. I know, sweet girl. But this is just a chapter. You'll visit me here again soon. Just in a different way. She smiled. Promise. Promise. I sat by her side until she slept, the weight of decades pressing lightly on my chest, but for once, it didn't feel like burden. It felt like armor. Tomorrow, they would pack. Next week, I'd start renovations. And next month, the house would open to women like me, forgotten, discarded, underestimated. But not anymore. 2 days after the party, the moving vans arrived. Not for me, no. For them. The ones who used to glare when I hummed, roll their eyes when I spoke, and treat my silence as compliance. Janice protested at first. Slammed doors, called lawyers, cried to Edward about betrayal. But I'd planned this move like war, and every piece was already in motion. The trust was ironclad. Her voice held no weight in legal language. She packed in silence after that. I stayed out of their way. I didn't gloat, didn't snap or sneer. Dignity was always my sharpest blade. I offered them nothing they could weaponize. But I did stand in the foyer the moment they left, one hand on the banister, the other holding Ellie's drawing, the one she made me 3 birthdays ago, a crayon portrait of the two of us holding hands beneath a house with a heart-shaped roof. Edward lingered a moment at the door. "Will I ever be able to fix this?" he asked. I didn't answer with words, just held his gaze. Let him feel the weight of what he'd let happen. He nodded, then turned and walked away. When the van pulled out of the driveway, I stepped outside. The air was crisp, freeing. The silence was mine again. But I didn't intend to keep it silent. That very afternoon, I met with my new project coordinator, a bright woman named Sonia who had once worked in women's shelters. Together, we sat on the porch, sipping iced tea, sketching floor plans for what would become the Margaret house. Each room needs to be more than just a bed and a window, I told her. It has to feel like rebirth. Sonia smiled. You want it to feel like they've been seen again. Yes, I said. Exactly. We'd offer more than shelter. There'd be career counseling, legal support, art classes, even a music room with a piano like the one I used to sing beside every night. And once a month, we'd host an open mic. Women could tell their stories, sing their songs, reclaim their voices. Just like I had. That evening, I stood in the grand parlor alone. No distant laughter mocking me, no sharp-edged commands, no footsteps I needed to silence my breath for. Just me and freedom. I looked up at the chandelier, my chandelier, and whispered, "You hung above the wrong queen for too long." I took a deep breath, then danced slowly beneath it. Alone, unafraid, and no longer invisible. 2 weeks later, I sat in the sunroom, a soft breeze curling the edges of old photographs scattered across the table. The house, my house, had changed already. The air was lighter. The silence was peaceful, not oppressive. And for the first time in decades, the rooms echoed not with demands, but with purpose. I picked up my pen and opened the leather-bound journal I'd kept hidden all these years, the one that held the names of women I'd met in waiting rooms, in bank lines, at church socials, and even on park benches. Women like me. Invisible. Discarded. Forgotten. I began writing letters. Not the kind you mail. These were invitations. Personal. Handwritten. A lifeline sealed with care. Dear Judith, I remember you once told me, sometimes I pretend to forget things just so they'll talk slower, like I'm still in the room. You don't have to pretend anymore. I'm building a place where your voice is the first one heard. Come for tea. Stay for healing. With love, Margaret. Dear Rosa, you were a nurse for 40 years, and now your son makes you eat in the garage to avoid smells. I have a room with a garden view and a kitchen that smells like vanilla and courage. It's yours if you want it. I wrote 20 letters that afternoon, each one folded with precision and sealed with a ribbon, not an envelope. I didn't want them to feel like bills or obligations. I wanted them to feel like hope. Later that week, Sonia and I hosted a tea gathering for our first 5 residents, Judith among them, along with a retired seamstress named Alma, a former music teacher named Florence, and 2 sisters who had cared for their dying mother for a decade without thanks. They walked in cautiously, eyes lowered, shoulders tense. But by the second cup of tea, Judith laughed. That laugh made the chandelier glitter brighter. Each woman had a story like mine. Each one had been erased, undervalued, or turned into household ghosts. And yet, here they were, breathing, smiling, remembering how to speak. This house, Alma said softly, running her hand along the polished banister, feels like it waited for us. It did, I said. And it will continue to wait. For every woman who needs it. We didn't need loud music or flashing cameras. Just a safe place, a quiet revolution of kindness, and the belief that the end of one life chapter could be the beginning of another. That night, as I walked through the candlelit hallway, I paused by the spare room. It was empty now, but not hollow. It held the ghosts of who I used to be. And it was finally time to let her rest. Because Margaret Eloise Carter was no longer just the old woman in the hallway. She was the founder of something that mattered. The first article arrived quietly, like most important things do. A slim, elegant envelope marked the Belmont Gazette landed in my mailbox one chilly Tuesday morning. I nearly tossed it into the recycling, thought it was another real estate ad. But something made me pause. Inside was a short letter from the editor and a neatly folded newspaper clipping. Former jazz club owner turns family mansion into sanctuary for forgotten women, by Charlotte Vance, Belmont Gazette. Lifestyle section 1. Read it twice before sitting down. Then a third time, slower, savoring the words like chocolate. Margaret Eloise Carter, once the silent resident of her own home, is now the matriarch of a movement. After reclaiming legal ownership of her estate, a sprawling Tudor-style mansion once thought to be her son's, she's transformed it into a nonprofit retreat for overlooked and underappreciated women over 60. We're not fragile, Carter said in an exclusive interview. We've just been trained to take up less space. I say it's time we take it back. My words, my voice, in print. I kept the article beside my teacup all morning. Judith brought it up first at breakfast, her face beaming. You made the paper, she said, tapping the headline like it was a prize ribbon. And it didn't even mention Janice. Oh, she won't like that, Alma chuckled, buttering her toast. I smiled but said nothing. Across town, I imagined Janice opening that very paper with a perfectly manicured hand, eyes skimming the column, mouth tightening with every word that wasn't about her. I could almost hear the porcelain crack of her teacup as she reached the end and saw the photo of me, standing tall under the chandelier, surrounded by women who now called this place home. My home. That afternoon, the phone rang off the hook. Invitations for interviews, nonprofit partnerships, even a call from a TV producer who loved the idea of an aging underdog becoming the quiet heroine. I declined the flashy ones. I wasn't interested in fame, but I did agree to one podcast interview. A young host named Lena asked the question no one else had yet. What made you stay silent for so long? I paused, then answered, because I thought being good meant being quiet. Because every time I tried to speak, someone spoke louder. Because I believed love meant endurance. I was wrong. A silence followed. Then Lena said, and now I know that being good doesn't mean being invisible. And love, real love, shouldn't hurt. We ended the interview with laughter and tears. That night, the women and I held a movie night in the great room. We watched Funny Girl, my favorite. The chandelier sparkled above us, casting soft, golden halos over silver hair and tired but unbowed shoulders. At one point, Florence leaned in and whispered, "You're the best part of the third act, Margaret. The part where the quiet character becomes unforgettable." I didn't answer, but my heart did, loud and clear. A year passed like a turning page. The mansion no longer echoed with cold civility but with music, conversation, and the laughter of women who had finally come home to themselves. We held workshops, shared stories, made quilts, and sang My God, we sang. Alma taught sewing in the West Wing, Florence gave piano lessons in the parlor, and Judith led yoga sessions every Sunday, claiming it helped her forget she was 78. The house pulsed with energy now. It lived again. And then came my 81st birthday. This time, I didn't wait for anyone to remember it. The invitations were sent out weeks in advance, handwritten in gold ink on thick ivory paper. The guest list? Only the ones who mattered, our residents, their daughters, grandchildren, women from the community, and a few allies who had offered help, not pity. The theme? We speak now. Everyone came dressed in shades of red, ruby, scarlet, garnet, as a tribute to the dress I once wore when they all ignored me. Now it had become a symbol, a signal. This time there was no pretending, no disguises. I wasn't serving drinks, I was raising toasts. The grand room was packed. Candles flickered, violins played, and the chandelier above us, that silent witness to everything I endured, glowed brighter than ever. I stood before the fireplace, glass in hand. Last year, I began. This house held a different energy, one of silence, of servitude, of swallowed words. Everyone watched, rapt. And now, I continued, this house is a place of voices, of stories, of strength. Applause swelled like a tide. I wasn't just speaking for me. I was speaking for every woman who had been overlooked, underestimated, and passed over like furniture left behind in an estate sale. I was once the woman who served tea in silence, I said. Now I serve something stronger, hope. They cheered. But the best part was yet to come. After the cake, after the dancing, after Florence played, as time goes by, and made us all cry, the front door opened unexpectedly. Edward and Ellie. Janice was not with them. He looked older, less polished. His jacket hung looser. His smile more real. I didn't come to fix anything, he said. Just to witness. He handed me a gift. A small box. Inside was a photo frame. The drawing Ellie had made, us beneath the heartroof house, but now colored and inked in, framed in polished walnut. I looked at him. I heard about what you're doing here, he said. It's incredible. I wish you had seen it sooner, I replied. He nodded. So do I. Ellie hugged me tightly. I told Daddy we needed to come. I missed you. I missed you too, darling. We didn't need to say more. I wasn't doing this for closure. I was doing it because no one had done it for me. As the night faded into candlelight and tired feet, I stood in the center of the room and closed my eyes. I was no longer a ghost in my own story. I was the author. The ink was mine. And this was just the beginning. A week after the celebration, I sat by the fountain in the back garden, sorting through a new pile of letters, only this time, they weren't mine. They were responses. Word of the retreat had spread beyond Belmont. Stories, betrayal, suspense, the trifecta of what people love to whisper about. Only this time, they weren't whispering against me, they were asking to join me. Some letters came typed, others handwritten in trembling ink. Dear Margaret, I haven't spoken in front of a group since 1989. My husband told me I made people uncomfortable. But last night, I read about you in the paper and cried into my pillow for hours. Not because I was sad, because someone finally said what I couldn't. Please, is there still room for one more voice? Dear Miss Carter, I spent my 75th birthday watching my children divide my things like I was already gone. I have nothing left to give them except my silence. I'd rather give you my story, if you'll have me. Some came with poems. Some came with donations. Some came with nothing at all except truth, and that was enough. Sonia created a bulletin board in the hallway. We pinned up the most powerful excerpts with the names blurred out. Our residents would stop and read a new one each morning, sipping coffee as if it were scripture. You've started something, Sonia told me, gently tapping the stack. And I don't think it'll stop. I hope it doesn't, I said. We're just getting started. I walked past the old guest room again that day. It had been transformed into a welcome room. Bright walls, soft cushions, tea always hot. A small gold plaque hung outside now. The spare room no more, may this space never again hold a forgotten woman. We kept it open at all hours. Anyone who arrived, frightened or hesitant, would first be brought there. The women took turns volunteering. Judith called it her ministry. Alma called it her soul kitchen. One afternoon, a new woman arrived. Tall, rigid posture, eyes alert with pride but clouded with hurt. Her name was Yvette. She had been an English professor for 40 years. Her children now lived overseas, and her caregivers had begun calling her dear in that patronizing way people do when they want to sound kind but don't mean it. She sat in the welcome room silently for 15 minutes. Then she looked up at me and said, "I don't want pity. I want purpose." "You came to the right place," I told her. A month after Yvette arrived, the house felt fuller, warmer, like autumn sunlight in late afternoon. The kind of warmth that doesn't announce itself loudly, but lingers. Each woman who walked through those doors brought a new thread to the quilt we were building, figuratively and literally. Florence's music students practiced piano in the morning. Alma hosted evening mend circles, where you repaired clothes and, in the process, something inside yourself too. Yvette surprised us all. Despite her silence in the first week, she soon began organizing small salons in the library where women read aloud from journals, letters, or favorite passages of poetry. She called it the reclamation hour. It became the heartbeat of the house. One day, after a particularly moving reading, Judith had finally shared the letter she wrote to her husband, the one she never sent. We sat in the conservatory drinking lemon tea when Sonia brought in a large, covered canvas. "What's this?" I asked. "A gift," Sonia replied. "You'll want to see." She pulled off the cover. It was a portrait. Of me. Not the red sequin dress version. Not the glamorous throwback. No, this was me now, silver-haired, upright in posture, soft-lined face, proud eyes that had seen both kindness and cruelty and still shined. Beneath the image, in hand-painted gold script, it read, "The woman who took back the room." I was stunned. "I didn't commission this," I said quietly. "We all did," Alma said, standing beside me. "You let us find ourselves again. You reminded us we didn't have to disappear." The portrait was hung in the great hall, directly across from the chandelier. Anyone who entered would see it, would know this house had a founder, a matriarch, a hero. Not a victim. Not a maid. A woman who rewrote her ending. Later that evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the hallway. I looked up at that portrait, then down the hall to the room where Janice once barked orders and Edward once walked past me without looking. They had become a shadow in my story. Not the climax, not the threat. Just shadows. Passing. Because the real story was here, in the light, in the voices and faces of women who now stood a little taller, because I had stood first. And as I turned to head back to my room, I whispered aloud to no one, "They treated me like a maid. On my 80th birthday, I bought the mansion they lived in. But on my 81st, I gave it to the women who needed it most." A month after Yvette arrived, the house felt fuller, warmer, like autumn sunlight in late afternoon. The kind of warmth that doesn't announce itself loudly, but lingers. Each woman who walked through those doors brought a new thread to the quilt we were building, figuratively and literally. Florence's music students practiced piano in the morning. Alma hosted evening mend circles, where you repaired clothes and, in the process, something inside yourself too. Yvette surprised us all. Despite her silence in the first week, she soon began organizing small salons in the library, where women read aloud from journals, letters, or favorite passages of poetry. She called it the reclamation hour. It became the heartbeat of the house. One day, after a particularly moving reading, Judith had finally shared the letter she wrote to her husband, the one she never sent. We sat in the conservatory drinking lemon tea when Sonia brought in a large, covered canvas. "What's this?" I asked. "A gift," Sonia replied. "You'll want to see." She pulled off the cover. It was a portrait. Of me. Not the red sequin dress version. Not the glamorous throwback. No, this was me now, silver-haired, upright in posture, soft-lined face, proud eyes that had seen both kindness and cruelty and still shined. Beneath the image, in hand-painted gold script, it read, "The woman who took back the room." I was stunned. "I didn't commission this," I said quietly. "We all did," Alma said, standing beside me. "You let us find ourselves again. You reminded us we didn't have to disappear." The portrait was hung in the great hall, directly across from the chandelier. Anyone who entered would see it, would know this house had a founder, a matriarch, a hero. Not a victim. Not a maid. A woman who rewrote her ending. Later that evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the hallway. I looked up at that portrait, then down the hall to the room where Janice once sparked orders and Edward once walked past me without looking. They had become a shadow in my story. Not the climax, not the threat, just shadows, passing. Because the real story was here, in the light, in the voices and faces of women who now stood a little taller, because I had stood first. And as I turned to head back to my room, I whispered aloud to no one. They treated me like a maid. On my 80th birthday, I bought the mansion they lived in. But on my 81st, I gave it to the women who needed it most. The conference had come and gone. I had spoken beneath bright lights in front of doctors, advocates, caregivers, and dignitaries. But no moment struck me as deeply as what waited when I returned home. A letter. Unmarked envelope. Familiar handwriting. It was from Janice. I sat alone in the solarium to read it. The house was quiet, the others out for their weekly poetry walk in the park. I unfolded the paper slowly, bracing for venom. But what I found surprised me. Margaret, I don't know why I'm writing. Maybe guilt, maybe confusion. Maybe because I saw your face on national TV and realized the woman I thought I broke is standing taller than I ever did. I was cruel. You know it. I know it. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need to tell you something I couldn't say before. I envied you. You were quiet, but powerful. Humble, but watchful. And somehow, even after everything, you still had something in you I never found in myself. Grace, I'm not asking to come back. That door should stay closed. But I hope, someday, Ellie sees in me even a sliver of what you gave her. Janice, I read it twice. No apology, exactly, but an admission. That was something. I folded the letter and slipped it into my drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but record. Because even the most venomous vines leave behind a bloom once in a while. A flawed one, but real. That evening, I sat with Ellie by the fire and told her the truth. All of it, she asked, wide-eyed. No, I smiled. Just enough for you to understand what strength really means. Is that why you never raised your voice? She asked. No, I said. I never raised it because I was saving it. For the day it mattered. She nestled into my side and whispered, it mattered. Outside, the garden lights cast soft halos over stone paths. Florence played a lullaby in the distance. Alma laughed from the kitchen. Yvette's voice echoed from the library as she led her evening salon. It was no longer a house of suffering. It was a house of survivors. And in the center of it all sat me, not because I demanded the throne, but because I built the kingdom when no one else would. We never used to open the east wing. It was cold, distant, a wing Janice had reserved for future plans that never came. She always spoke of it like an empty gallery, polished and used purely for show. But now, it had become something else entirely. We called it the room with the red chair. It started with Alma. She brought in an old velvet chair from a consignment shop, worn, regal, unmistakably red. She placed it in the center of a sunlit room, no rug, no distractions, just the chair. It feels like a confession chair, Florence joked one morning. But Alma didn't laugh. No, she said, it feels like a testimony chair. And so, every Wednesday at noon, we began gathering there. One woman would sit in the red chair and share something she'd never said aloud before. No rules, no interruptions, just truth. Sometimes it was laughter, sometimes tears, always healing. Judith spoke of the night she almost drove away and never came back. Yvette admitted she hadn't cried in 20 years, until she arrived here. Even I sat in the chair. I used to believe silence was strength, I said, voice even. But silence, when used to survive, becomes a prison. And one day, I realized. I didn't want my last words to be nothing. They held my hand afterward. Not because I was broken, but because I had opened. The red chair became sacred. No one sat in it outside of Wednesday. It wasn't a seat. It was a symbol. That week, Ellie asked if she could sit in it. I hesitated. She was young, but her eyes were steady. She sat down, legs dangling, hands folded, and said, I know grown-ups think I don't see things, but I do. I saw how you were treated, and I saw how you changed everything. And when I grow up, I want to change things too. It was quiet for a moment. Then Alma clapped. Florence cried. And I closed my eyes and whispered a silent thank you to every version of myself who never gave up. The one in the spare room. The one in the red dress. The one who served tea without being seen. Because each of them walked me here, to this house, this chair, this moment, where I was no longer the forgotten woman in the hallway. I was the foundation. They say legacy is what you leave behind, but I believe it's also what you set in motion. Years have passed since the day I first took back my voice. The house has changed hands, but only in spirit, never in power. I remain its keeper, but the heartbeat is now shared by dozens of women who've come, healed, and passed their light to the next. The walls hold laughter now. Deep, echoing laughter that rattles chandeliers and seeps into the floorboards. And when newcomers arrive with sunken shoulders and wary eyes, we meet them with stories, not pity. They learn about the red chair, the chandelier, the woman who used to serve tea. And eventually, they learn it's not just my story. It's theirs too. I sit now in the rose garden, pen in hand, the sun warming my face. The final page of my journal flutters in the breeze. The last page of the last book I'll ever write, because the rest no longer needs ink. It lives, breathing and pulsing in every room of this house. And so I write this letter to the woman reading this. You who have been ignored, silenced, labeled as too much or not enough. You who folded towels in silence while others took credit. You who sat in the corner, not because you lacked a voice, but because you knew no one was ready to hear it. I see you. And it's not too late. You don't need to burn bridges or raise your voice to claim your power. Sometimes all it takes is a quiet decision. Not anymore. You are not invisible. You are not finished. You are not too old, too quiet, or too kind to change everything. And if you ever doubt that, there's a red chair waiting for you in the East Wing. With love and defiance, Margaret Eloise Carter, I fold the journal shut, set it on the bench, and smile at the sun-dappled sky. The world may forget my name someday, but it will never forget what I built. Because I was the woman who bought the mansion they lived in and turned it into a legacy they could never steal. Here the story ends. Thanks for watching. Hit like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more true tales and real stories.